Welcome to the Commonwealth Policy Center Candidate Forum. I'm Richard Nelson, Executive Director and founder of CPC. There are 12 Republicans who've announced they'd like to replace Andy Beshear as the next governor of Kentucky. However, only one of them will emerge out of the May 16th primary. But to further help you understand the candidates and why they're running for office and what they would do once they were elected, we are hosting these forums. So joining us on this session is Somerset Mayor Alan Keck. Alan, welcome to the forum.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here.
I appreciate you making it to the office. I know you have been working hard, traveling the state, speaking to various groups, and you've been really busy, haven't you?
We have. I always say busy is blessed, though, especially in a campaign. We've had an opportunity to share our vision and listen to the concerns of Kentuckians. I love both of those opportunities, and so every day has been a good day.
Good. So there are a dozen candidates running in the gubernatorial primary on the Republican ticket. So what makes you think you're the one that's head and shoulders above the others, or the one that voters should vote for? How do you distinguish yourself, maybe, is the question I'm asking, between the other candidates?
I first like to say that I don't view the other 11 as my opponents. They're just folks running for the same office, applying for the same job in a very public way. And so I think that's the first distinction that I would offer. But as we create contrast, and that's not by going negative, it's by accentuating the things that we think make us unique. It's three things. The first thing is we are campaigning in what I call radical transparency and authenticity. We've answered almost 1,000 questions now. Hopefully you'll help push me almost over the edge here. Okay. We're at 900 and something. And, we've never ducked a question from a citizen, from an advocacy group, from the media. We answer them all. And I think Kentuckians deserve to know where all of us stand. The second thing I'd say, Richard, is my executive experience is really unique in this race. While it's a quality field with quality people, there is nobody in this race that has been a CEO in the private sector and the public. Now, candidly, I'm not sure any of them have been either of those things, and we've been both. And so while some will champion their governmental experience at different lengths and their education backgrounds, and again, it makes them solid people and good candidates, I think ours is very unique. Because we've been a change agent in both of those. And the last thing I'll say is our vision. The scripture says that without a vision, people will perish. And we're not simply talking about the same national issues that every other Republican is talking about. We launched the Keck game plan on day one. And it's a comprehensive plan with 4 pillars that cast our vision for Kentucky. And no one else in the field has a full platform for the voters to see. And I think that's unique as well.
Tell us about those 4 pillars. I've not seen that yet, but tell us what those 4 pillars are.
I'd love to. We start with the economy and we end with family, and I bookend it like that for a reason. My anchor is family and pro-family policy. I'll elaborate on that in a minute. But it starts with the economy. I think we need more hope and opportunity in Kentucky. Hope without opportunity is just sort of an idea, right? You have to have that practical next step. We offer that. In real growth and sliding scale benefit reform to help the working poor instead of paying those unwilling to work, in tax reform, which is reducing the income tax and some other tax structures. We talk a lot about public safety. That's the second pillar. We're never going to have a strong Kentucky unless we have a safe Kentucky, and we've outlined a plan on public safety. The third thing is education. I think we've outlined some educational policies that others are starting to follow. I've been a champion for school choice and public schools at the same time. And for a long time as Republicans, we were told you couldn't do that. I absolutely think you can. I don't think we have to pick and choose. In fact, I think the other side wants us to pick and choose. And then we've advocated for early childhood education. And then the final thing I'll say is our pro-family policies, I think, are really unique. I hope that they'll become a model for the Republican Party. As a pro-life Christian, I'm proud of being pro-life, but also I think that the conversation needs to extend past birth.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's expand on that, because pro-lifers have been accused of just caring about the child in the womb. Once the baby's born, then they just leave the mother and the baby up to whatever devices.
And I think their answer often is, well, it's not the government's role then. And there's some there's an argument to be had there, but I would say that, as a conservative, if we're going to fight for things that we want to conserve, and I would say the family needs to be at the heart of that, then why would we not advocate for policies that will produce more behaviors that we want instead of incentivizing behaviors that we don't? And so pro-family policy for me might mean tax incentives for businesses to give extra maternity or parental leave, to give mom and dad a chance to spend more time together with the new baby. I would offer those same benefits to those that choose to adopt or foster, because that integration is also unique and special. And we want to encourage that. Getting rid of taxes on necessities for families like diapers, wipes, and formula. Why are you paying a tax on what's a necessity for a young family? And then finally, using the bully pulpit of the governor's office for childcare. We have so many women that want to get back into the workforce. And look, I admire, my wife has stayed at home. She has worked. She's done both at different times in our kids' lives. But you shouldn't have to beg to get childcare. And right now in Kentucky, it's more expensive and harder to find than it ever has been. Well, that's not going to be attractional for more families. And so we think our pro-family policy is rooted in common sense, but it will also be policy that will be attractional for families that are looking for a state in the heartland that they want to move to. We hope it'll encourage new couples to have children, because it's not going to be so expensive. And we also hope, candidly, that it's a little bit of pushback of some of that criticism, because I know that Christians and conservatives do care about that whole life of that child. But I think we need to, for lack of a better analogy, put our money where our mouth is.
Sure. You'd mentioned education, Alan. What are some specific things you would do to expand choice? School choice is something you're for.
I am.
So let me take a step back. The state Supreme Court struck down in a unanimous ruling EOA's educational opportunity accounts. It's where generous donors put money into a fund. They get a very generous tax write-off, but in that fund, this entity can give scholarships to those in the lower socioeconomic strata of society. That was struck down. What would you do to encourage that kind of thing, where you have philanthropy, you have donors that have resources, and they want to help kids that are trapped in inner city schools or underperforming schools?
Well, let me start with the philosophical rationale behind it. Is I think choice then spurs competition, and the argument that if you have choice, then all the other schools are going to struggle. Well, perhaps that then is an encouragement to do better, right? I think we need to start earlier, and I also think that starting earlier can allow for precedent. And I'm going to share why. Maybe I'm spilling my beans too much here, but if we were to push for early childhood education, we have a lot of private preschools in the state. Well, Republicans, Democrats, or the courts aren't going to argue that some of that money needs to follow the student to those private preschools. They're not going to put them all out of business. And so by starting in that way, maybe we set precedent that some money, maybe not all, but some money can follow the student, which then would allow for greater school choice long term. I say all that to say, though, that I'm still an ardent supporter of public schools. I'm a product of public schools. So is my wife, Tiffany. She went to Louisville Southern. My parents, my siblings, my 3 daughters go to public school. I had so many teachers that I adored. I'd like to think some of them liked me as well. My kids love going there. As a party, and I'm speaking as a conservative, I don't want to speak for you, but I know where your heart lies, I think. We can't always demonize educators and then expect them to come on our side when we need them. I think that, what we say and how we say it really matters. And I'm going to stand on those 2 pillars until somebody proves to me that I can't do both.
Yeah, I would go a step further and just add that I think we can agree that most educators in our public schools really want to do what's best for the kids. They work hard, they care for the kids, and they're giving it their all to educate those kids. So
the overwhelming majority, I think. Sure, like any profession, there's some bad actors, but I think most public educators have their heart in the right spot.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the primary again. 12 candidates on the Republican side. We're starting to see some negative campaigning. Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment is, "Thou shalt not speak ill of a fellow Republican." What are your thoughts regarding negative campaigns?
Well, evidently they work, because all these consultants are forcing their candidates into doing it, right? I'm not going to go negative. Actually, I got accused the other day because I commented on something that one of our opponents said about the border in a different way. And I wasn't throwing shade. I'm just saying that the southern border I care most about is the one on Kentucky-Tennessee line, because I think we have an economic crisis that leads to drug abuse. And the governor of Kentucky doesn't have a lot to say about the southern border of Mexico outside of, just some rhetoric perhaps, and support of the president or national policy. I'm still introducing myself to voters. I know that. We have a record to run on in my private life, my job as mayor, but I haven't been a statewide candidate like some of the others for a term or 2 terms. I don't have the resources per se of somebody like Ambassador Kraft. But accordingly, I'm just going to cast my own vision, talk about our own story. We did that when I ran for mayor the second time. I never mentioned my opponent's name, or very rarely, I should say. And instead, I challenge those in Somerset to dream about what was possible, and tell that story. That's what we're trying to do here. It's why I announced my platform on day one. It doesn't mean that I won't argue and articulate why I think I'm more qualified. But I can sit here today and share a nice thing about almost everybody in this race. Those that I know well, from Daniel Cameron, Ryan Quarles, Kelly Craft, Mike Harmon, David Cooper. I could probably say something nice about all of them and a few of the others. And if you want to put me on the spot on that later, you can, or we'll save that for another edition.
Well, okay, I'm going to press on that.
Yeah,
because
sure.
as a candidate, you need to distinguish yourself from the field, and that's what's happening with you and the 11 other Republicans running for governor. That's why you're on this program. If you emerge, though, so there's a lot of similarity on the Republican side, a lot of similarity between y'all. If you emerge, though, from that Republican primary, you will be facing a sitting governor who has a track record. And there's a reason why you ran. And here's where I want to go with this. What would be your biggest criticism of the current governor? What is the one thing, or if you have two, what would you do differently, or what is the policy, that position that he's taken that you would take a different track on?
Well, I'm going to speak very broadly. I don't think he shares the values of the majority of Kentuckians. So that's one in an umbrella approach. But 2 specific things, like several of my Republican primary colleagues, the governor has never really spent much time in the private sector, and he's never really built a team. And I think that shows up. When you put somebody in charge that has never done those things, unless they're humble enough to surround themselves with some other amazing leaders, they're not ready to lead. And this governor's never done that. We're talking about a $40 billion budget and 10,000 plus employees. This is a huge job. It's a CEO job. And so I think in so many ways he has failed in assembling the quality of team and or been humble enough to say, look, I got to have some other alphas and A players around me. The second thing is he loves to brag about economic development announcements. He never shares credit with the Republican legislature that helped set this framework up. In fact, if he would, the guy'd be really hard to beat. But along that, he never talks about who's going to work at these facilities. We already have one of the worst workforce crises in America. It's why our sliding scale benefit reform package, I think, is transformational for our Commonwealth. A policy that will allow us to help that single mom who's doing all she can, working 2 jobs, still struggling, the double income family who's barely making ends meet because they've got, childcare and sports and the things that all of us are dealing with inflation. I want to talk about this workforce crisis and getting Kentuckians back to work, growing our population, and then putting the people that live here back to work.
Well, let's talk about that. I want to press into that a little bit. According to a survey done a while ago, about 50% of Kentucky's workforce, or eligible workforce, these are people 18 to about 60, are not engaged.
That's correct.
Why is that?
Well, I think it's several things. I think it's generational poverty, where we've gotten too used to the welfare in the nanny state, candidly. As a party, I think we've not talked about that enough. I also think recently, though, it's a result of failed leadership and vision from him during COVID. When we were coming out of the pandemic, he kept us shut down for too long. He also kept the money coming in from the feds for too long. So for a long time, you'll remember all states, you were able to get $600 a week of federal benefit. Well, then that went to $300. But when it went to 300, there were plenty of jobs. There was no reason to stay at home and get that unemployment. The surrounding states all got rid of that 300, and he kept it coming in. Well, you develop negative habits and a workforce that can become entitled. And I think candidly, we've gotten into that place, and we're going to have to get more creative to get folks back to work.
Now, Governor Beshears, despite the criticisms, you criticized how he handled the COVID shutdown, extended benefits that other states didn't allow. Some would say he did a good job. In fact, perhaps there's a majority that say he did a good job because his approval rating is very, very high.
Yeah, it is.
Upwards, I've seen different numbers, upper 50 percentile to the low 60s.
That's correct.
So why is he that popular of a governor?
Well, I'm going to say something, and I don't want to minimize what war actually is. We opened a veterans park in Somerset today where we got to honor the veterans who have fought for our country since 1973, an all volunteer force that I just have such a deep gratitude for. But I'm going to use the analogy because I think folks will understand. In some ways, the governor has almost been like a wartime president because of the tragedy of COVID and him having the ability to get on TV every day for 2 years. The tragedies and tornadoes and floods, you know, the men that just lost their lives in that helicopter accident. He has been a governor who does show up in those instances. I would argue that those aren't the only times you need to show up, but he has. And here's the other thing about Andy is I think that most would say he appears to be a good husband, a good dad. And so that genuinely then shows up as, you know, he might be a likable guy, even if you disagree with a lot of his leadership. And that's kind of where I'm at with him. I don't think he's some evil guy who inherently is bad. I just don't think he agrees with us or the majority of Kentuckians on some key issues. And I don't think he's allowing us to reach our potential. At the end of the day, this is an incredibly special state with unmatched potential in the region, yet we're routinely in the bottom 5 in America in almost every important measurable. Well, until somebody addresses that, to me, they failed us as a leader, and he has not. And it's incumbent on one of us to make sure we accentuate those failures and then share why we're different and how we can accomplish something else.
Governor Andy Beshear talks about his faith quite a bit. You see him give references to God and quote scripture. How does your faith inform public service?
Well, it's central for me. I open almost every public talking address, if you will, with the 2 most important things to me, which are my faith and my family. It's foundational for me. I joke that I don't need Madison Avenue to tell my faith and family story. It's how I live my life. That doesn't, by the way, make me or him or anyone else perfect. We're not without sin, of course. That's human nature at this point. But when I talk about my decision-making matrix, it is rooted in scripture. It's rooted in the Bible and those principles, how I treat people. You know, when Jesus was asked what the 2 most important commandments were, he said what? Love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. And secondly, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, you know, to me, loving your neighbor, that means that's everybody. And when I'm chasing this opportunity to lead, but to also serve this state, that means everybody. And that's how I try to treat people.
Got a list of questions I'd like to go over, several related to what the General Assembly did. Of course, the last couple of sessions, there has been an effort to eliminate state income taxes. Recently, Governor Beshear signed it into law to reduce the taxes down to 4%. Is this something that you're in favor of, phasing out the state income tax?
I absolutely am. And I say the faster, the better. I think the quicker we can get to 0, allowing folks to keep more of their hard-earned money, being taxed on how they choose to spend it, it's more fair and it'll help us grow.
How about increasing taxes in the sales area? And that's where the decrease in income taxes have to be made up. It's the increase in sales taxes. Right now, the legislature, actually last session, maybe 2 sessions ago, they did increase in certain areas, certain services and certain tech products. What about the ag industry in particular? This is one where there's an exemption on ag sales taxes. Anything related, you go to Tractor Supply or these other places, implement dealers, that kind of thing. Is that something that's off the table? I know agriculture is very important for Kentucky, but it's one of those sacred cows. Not trying to mix metaphors or no pun intended.
But yeah, pun it cheap perhaps. Well, I think, you know, on food, which is obviously comes from ag, you know, it's not taxed and shouldn't be. I think we have to be careful though when we start to cherry pick certain industries. How far do you extend that? Then what about the sale of horses? What about the revenue from the horse racing industry? What about bourbon that's produced out of corn? So I think it's a slippery slope. If we do have sacred cows per se, that might not be popular in some sections of it, or we tax vehicles. So then I think there's probably are enough tax benefits from owning a farm, you know, write-offs if you're purchasing equipment to not have those. I don't know the specific exemptions well enough to make that claim boldly. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but where I was going with this, because that is one very influential industry. And by the way, I've got a farm in North Franklin County, and I do benefit with some of these write-offs. I'm grateful for that. At the same time, as a conservative, I want to see equal footing at the law. I don't want to see one industry or one area benefit at the expense of others. I
Right.
think whether you're producing bourbon or you're in the raising racehorses or a farmer, if we're going to phase out the state income tax and if we're going to increase taxes and sales in other areas, there should be equal treatment under the law. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely, and I've said something that I think very few are actually willing to. We have to be honest about these conversations. There's two things that I don't think the rest of the field is as willing to discuss.
Mhm.
Eventually, we're going to have to raise the sales tax.
Mhm.
You know, nobody that's willing to have a responsible conversation about this can, and I know as a conservative, somebody will cherry pick this podcast. I told you Keck's for tax increases. It's not what I said, but if we can get to zero, we're going to have to raise the sales tax. The second thing though is the states that we claim we always want to follow, they mentioned Tennessee instantly.
Mhm.
They have a local sales tax. They allow communities to control their own destiny and sort of, bridge their own future, if you will. We don't here. That's constitutionally banned. You can't pass a local sales tax. I'm in support of that. Some of my conservative friends in Frankfurt say, well, we don't want any new taxes. And I say, well, wait a minute, big brother, now you want to tell me what's best for my local community. And they want to kind of cherry pick when we're going to actually have this discussion at Liberty. And so I think those are discussions that need to be a little bit more transparent. And I think would also make things more fair because the community would choose. And when I go to church, when I go to Kroger, I'm accountable. Folks aren't scared to interrupt me if they don't like what I'm doing. And government closest people's best. I think we need to make sure we're shouting that from the rooftops.
One of the most controversial bills, Alan, in this last legislative session was Senate Bill 150.
Mm-hmm.
It dealt with keeping sex ed out of K-5 classrooms. It required parental permission if sex ed was taught in grades 6 through 12. Protected teachers from being forced to use preferred gender pronouns of students and keeping it secret from parents. And then there was a portion that dealt with gender dysphoric minors. It prevented them from pursuing puberty blockers, hormone therapy, or surgical intervention. And is that a bill that you would have been in favor of if you were in the legislature that did pass into law? Governor Bashir vetoed the bill.
Yeah. It is, I haven't read it in full, but I know the Cliff Notes, if you will, the central themes, and I do support it. I think that I would have signed it. Certainly would not have vetoed it. And I think it's something that the governor is going to have to answer for. He has an interesting dilemma ahead of him of where he chooses. If you look at his decision in the juvenile system, where he's very adamant about getting girls out of the facility with boys, he doesn't mind making the distinction then. And look, that was a good decision.
Yeah.
But then in other times, playing in sports, he vetoed that, and then he just vetoed 150. So that'll be up to him and incumbent on him to answer that and maybe decide which of those sides is actually right. Because to me, they're hypocritical. But I am in support of it. I also will say that, again, I think what we say and how we say it matters. I want to make sure that these kids that are dealing with these challenges are still treated with love and mercy and grace. And every situation is unique. And I think that we're all made in the image of the Lord. And while I don't think that they're ready to make a decision of that magnitude before they're 18, I do want to make sure that we're being sympathetic to the challenges that they're faced with.
Another bill the legislature passed this last session was Senate Bill 47. It legalized medicinal marijuana. Are you concerned about any downsides with that legislation, particularly when it comes to those who might be pursuing recreational use and not really have a legitimate medical claim to use it?
Certainly, I think we need to be concerned about it. I was in support of medical marijuana. I was, I think, the first candidate to come out for it, but that was as medicine. That was me talking to the parents of kids that battle seizures, talking to seniors that are dealing with extreme and chronic pain. And then again, talking to veterans who are dealing with some severe cases of insomnia, PTSD, anxiety and the like. And so I think it needs properly regulated. I think we need to be careful. I would say that those that were wanting to pursue it recreationally are probably doing it already illegally. I don't know that this pathway is really going to help them that much. I also do want to be cautious that this doesn't trickle into recreational use. That's not what I'm advocating for. I haven't advocated for that. I think that's a slippery slope, especially in a state that already struggles with workforce, to create a population that becomes dependent on it. And so I also want to ensure that if it's going to be medicine, I didn't support the original legislation because it was in the ABC cabinet. They're almost looking at it like it was alcohol. Well, that's recreational. and so there's a difference there. If it's medicine, we need to treat it as such.
Yeah. Ryan Quarles' proposal, Commissioner of Agriculture Quarles was in favor of medicinal marijuana, but he wanted a very narrow use, and it was for people at end of life, suffering from cancer, going through chemotherapy. And that's where he has staked out his position.
Mine's not quite as narrow, and I think there's other benefits to it. If you look at the science behind the plant that I think can be helpful, but we don't want it so broad that, to your point, anybody goes and gets a medical card and they're just simply using it for recreational use.
The state legislature also passed a framework for the state to have sports gambling, and this is where most of it will be done on an app on a smartphone or an iPad, and they can legally gamble on sporting events and probably other type activities as well. Do you have any concerns with minors? I'm thinking of the teenage boys that want to somehow circumvent the protocols, because you've got to be 18 under the legislation. I believe it was 18.
Should be 21,
or maybe it was maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. But if not, me and you both need to look at that. Yeah. I hope it's 21.
Do you have concerns though for minors that can circumvent the safeguards to keep them away from this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I haven't been asked that one yet. I think we should always be concerned about what our youth have exposure to, what they're allowed to get into. I know that traditionally the folks that are allowing the sports gaming, the folks like the FanDuels and William Hill, they're pretty strict. Even so much as targeting where you are, if you're just across the river, you're not going to be able to log into the app. I also propose and hope that as this continues to unfold, I know that the bill did pass. I think it was 551.
That's right.
I advocated for it, Richard. I want you to know that. But I also said, I want strict measures. I don't want credit cards to be able to be used where folks can go into debt to gamble. I think the age thing is important as well. I think we need weekly limits or monthly limits to where folks can't dig too deep.
So this is interesting that you're talking about this, because many Kentuckians, if not a majority, believe that this is a recreational activity. We have a culture of gambling, specifically on horses, but many people see it as entertainment.
Sure.
Most people aren't going to develop an addiction. Yet some people will.
Yeah.
A good number of the population, between 1% to 7%, according to one study done out of Murray State University several years ago, showed that those that gamble will become a compulsive gambler or have some kind of a gambling problem. So your proposal, or what you're talking about, is to restrict or to really have safeguards in place for those who might develop an addiction. Have you given further thought as to how that might look? Gambling losses, to stop the gambling losses, or to stop those who have a compulsion from gambling?
Well, again, I think one is not taking credit cards, and a lot of these companies are already doing that in certain states. That's not foolproof. Sure, you could go borrow money, put it in your account, and use a debit card. But if you restrict the weekly limit, or perhaps have some type of system where it flows with your level of income, where you might have to prove that you can't afford it, so to speak. I'm a big believer, the liberty part of me, and this is a struggle. My head and my heart always don't line up on this one. That once you've made your money and you pay taxes on it, you can choose how you spend it. But at the same time, some guardrails or safeguards, as you said, I don't think are a bad thing. I mean, I don't know that anybody needs to be spending 10 grand a month to bet on ball games. Although if you're worth $1 billion, then I guess you should be able to do whatever you choose. And so how that would scale, I don't know. But I would submit that there should be some type of middle ground guardrail to help folks.
So what about individuals that are receiving some kind of state or federal support, if they're on food stamps, if they have some kind of welfare support from the government, or perhaps let's look at dads or moms paying child support? Would that be a factor as far as limiting the losses and making sure that they're not losing all?
That's such a good thought. One of the reasons I advocated for it was because I thought just the hypocrisy of, we have the lottery, now we have these these slot machine facilities, you have the horse tracks. You can't really prohibit them from pulling $40 out of their bank account and going and gambling. So I wouldn't want to create the safeguards that were disproportionate to the other industries. But if there was a way to make it sort of across the board, I'm a big believer that some of the food that we're allowed to buy on an EBT that's causing diabetes and early cardiac issues shouldn't be allowed either. I think you might be onto something, that if you're going to get a benefit from the feds, which again, a lot of people need them. And, in my sliding scale benefit reform package, we talk about that that there's some requirements with that. I think that is worthy of extended discussion, unquestionably.
In 2020, Governor Beshear vetoed the Born Alive bill. It protected unborn children who survive a botched abortion. He vetoed that. The legislature eventually overrode it. What is is that, first of all, is that something you would have signed into law? The Born Alive, this is where viable infants, again, survive an abortion. It's rare, but it does happen.
Yeah, well, they should be able to continue with their life, if that's what you're asking. I don't know exactly how it was written, but to be able to go back and try again, per se, just seems as inhumane as anything in the world.
Yeah. Functionally right now, abortion is outlawed in the Commonwealth. There are no abortion centers operating. The next battle seems to be over chemical abortion, although there are restrictions here. California's governor criticized Walgreens for following state laws. Walgreens said, we will not dispense or sell abortion-inducing drugs in states that have outlawed it. Is that something you would support? I mean, essentially, it's just following the state law.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if something's passed into law, then I think we have to support it. We need to be a country and a state of law and order. And this is not a dictatorship, even if Alan Keck's the governor. I don't have all the answers, and we have a legislative body that I plan on working with, working alongside, hopefully listening to. I would hope that they'll extend me that same olive branch and we'll work together. But again, if something is law in Kentucky, then it's going to be just that law.
Are you hearing from your constituents, Alan, a lot about the Second Amendment? This is a constant issue in the news. It's in the news again, where there was a tragic shooting in Nashville. There's a call for more restrictions on firearm sales, red flag laws. Kentucky does not have one. But are these conversations you're hearing people talk about on the campaign trail?
But not as much as you might think. I mean, I think Kentucky's such a pro 2A state that not to say that they're taking it for granted or that we've got it in the bag, but we're not going to pass things like that in this legislature, nor do I think we should. If you look at the states that have more restrictive laws, they're not inherently safer or effective. I will be coming out very soon, Richard, with some school safety policy. We want to lead the way. Part of my public safety platform on day one is improve school safety. I think we can accomplish that with some creative ways, some creative legislation, leveraging our existing technology without infringing on anyone's Second Amendment right.
Can you give us a little preview?
I can. I mean,
so here's a specific question. Not sure if you can answer this, but there's talk of having security within the schools, even police at the school doors, single entrance where people go through, and you'd have an armed guard there.
Yeah. Well, we put an SRO in every school in Somerset when I took office. We did that before the legislature encouraged one in every district or every area. I don't think sharing one is enough. I do think we need one in every single school, but we're going to advocate for several other steps to make that more affordable, to make it quicker, more accessible, and then again, some existing technology that we can put in our schools right away to make sure our kids are safe. What bigger priority could we have in the state of Kentucky than ensuring our kids that go to public school are going to come home?
Yeah.
And when folks tell me they can't afford it, my counter is going to be, what can we afford? What's more important? And I don't think there is anything. And I hope to move that conversation forward very quickly.
Alan, we are running out of time. What kind of people, very briefly, what kind of people would you surround yourself with if you were elected governor? What kind of character traits do you look for in the kind of advisors or cabinet secretaries? What are the things you look for?
Well, shared values is going to be a big thing. Scripture talks about being equally yoked. But outside of that, I welcome a diversity of skill sets, personalities, background training. I'm confident in the skills that God has given me. He's made me a leader who can cast vision, encourage, empower, and bring people together. I know He made me really good at that, but He also made me self-aware enough to know that I'm not good at a lot of things. And I'm okay with a lot of other type A personalities, get stuff done leaders, and we'll build a cabinet of experts, people that are passionate in whatever field that is, whether it's education, public safety, infrastructure, tourism, economic development, you name it. There are leaders and experts in there that want to be there and move Kentucky forward. And it's not going to be about credit. It's going to be about changing lives in the Commonwealth. And we've done that in Somerset. That's why we've had record success. And I look forward to doing it in Frankfort.
Very good. You've got the last minute. Tell the voters why they should vote for
Yeah.
you on May the 16th. If they're a Republican voter, why
Yeah.
they should vote for you then in that primary.
Well, I thank you for having me, and thank you all for listening and giving me this opportunity. You know, I've been blessed to get to lead and serve my hometown. I've been a CEO in my private life, running a family business that did business all across the country, and now getting to lead and serve my hometown of Somerset, where we have had record revenue, record economic development, and a revitalized downtown that's brought the heartbeat of our community back. I think that the potential for Kentucky is unmatched, but we're 48th in median income, we're 48th in workforce, we're 44th in healthcare, 48th in fiscal stability. We are simply not winning, and it's time for a change agent. It's time for a common sense, do something governor who can bring people together in a unique way and start to unleash the potential that Kentucky has. This is a field of quality people, but none of them have the fruit in their life that shows they can definitely do this job. We do, and I'd be honored and humbled for your consideration and then your vote on May the 16th.
All right. Alan Keck, best wishes to
Yeah,
the campaign
thank you so
trail.
much.
All right.
Thank you.